Now, Labour has been battling accusations of anti-Semitism since Jeremy Corbyn took over as leader, including from within the Labour Party itself. The party adopted a new code of conduct last week, outlining various definitions of what constitutes anti-Semitic behaviour. The party's ruling body says the definition of it in the code goes further than other internationally recognised versions. But some of the party's MPs are furious about the code, saying it is nowhere near tough enough. One MP, Margaret Hodge, is facing action from the party after reportedly swearing at Mr Corbyn and calling him an anti-Semite. Well, she spoke to the Today programme a little bit earlier on.
There have been various reports of that encounter. Did you really call Jeremy Corbyn racist and anti-Semite?
I've always in the past disagreed with the people who've called him an anti-Semite, but at the end of the day, people have to be judged on what they do and not on what they say. They have to be judged on their actions and not their words. And I think what's happened over the last months, from failure to respond to anti-Semitism against Labour Party members, from failure to respond to the massive demonstration, unique demonstration by the Jewish community, culminating in a failure to adopt in full the universally used definition of anti-Semitism, was just a bridge too far. It's not what you say, it's what you do. And he hasn't adopted the full definition of anti-Semitism, which everybody else have, every other institution, the CPS, the government, local authorities, the devolved administrations, they've all adopted this definition. It's one with which the Jewish community feel comfortable. He's tried to impose another one on him, on us, and that actually leaves out, it omits a whole series of actions. Since the incident in the House of Commons last week, I have clearly had a spate of anti-Semitic emails and social media messages to me. Although I have to say to you, Martha, I think I've had more supportive messages than the negative ones. And the Sunday Times yesterday published some of them that appear on Facebook. I've been called a Zionist bitch. I've been told that I'm under the orders of my paymaster in Israel. I've been called a supporter of the racist state of Israel. And I've been told that they should dress me as a Palestinian so that her own paymasters shoot the traitor. Let me finish this point. And the only connection between me and Israel is that I'm a Jew, and Jews live in Israel. And seeing my beliefs in Israel really through the prism of my Jewish identity is at the heart of this argument. Within 12 hours of my actually talking to Jeremy Corbyn face to face, I received a disciplinary letter. 12 hours. Think how long it has taken for the Labour Party to respond at all to any of the allegations of anti-Semitism. And I just don't even know whether the Labour Party has responded to the terrible, terrible words that have appeared in the Sunday Times yesterday, accusing me of absolutely horrific things. This is a fight about my identity, the values that brought me into the Labour Party. I'm going to fight within the Labour Party. And it's terrible that in 2018 I have to do that.
Well, tonight, a group of MPs will push for the full internationally recognised definition of anti-Semitism to be included in their own rulebook. And in a separate move, the campaign group Jewish Labour Movement is considering taking legal action against the party. Well, let's get more now from Norman Smith at Political Guru. So, Norman, how likely is it that Jeremy Corbyn will be able to draw a line under this?
I would say pretty unlikely, frankly, given how this whole saga has unfolded over months and months, and again. Mr Corbyn has tried to put it to bed by holding inquiries, by meeting with various Jewish groups, and still it rumbles on. And were action to be taken against Margaret Hodge, I suspect that would be an absolutely incendiary move that would further sow division between the two camps. Although, to be fair, talking to those around Mr Corbyn last night, I get the sense they are looking to diffuse the threat of disciplinary action against Margaret Hodge, suggesting that it may now just be a verbal reprimand, although I would think even a verbal reprimand will be seen by some as unacceptable. But the bottom line is basically this: within Mr Corbyn's entourage and fellow figures on the left, they want greater latitude to be able to criticise Israel and Israeli policies, which they do not think is necessarily anti-Semitic. Many Jewish organisations believe that far too often attacking Israel is used as a proxy for attacking Jews, and therein lies the real heart of the division. And I see no sign that Mr Corbyn is inclined to back off from his political stance, supporting Palestinians, being highly critical of many Israeli policies, and so it's very hard to see how you get some sort of reconciliation. And the longer this has gone on, we've had demonstrations in Parliament, we've had pretty much every different Jewish organisation protesting, complaining about Labour's stance. It's very hard to see how this can be resolved. And now we have the Parliamentary Labour Party in effect saying that the code of conduct drawn up by the Labour Party is not good enough because it doesn't include all the examples contained in the international code. So you now have a situation where quite possibly you could end up with the Parliamentary Labour Party, by and large critical of Mr Corbyn, at loggerheads with the National Executive Committee, by and large supportive of Mr Corbyn, over this issue of anti-Semitism.
Norman Smith, thank you very much, Assistant Political Editor. Well, in a moment, we're going to speak to Billy Bragg, a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, who's regularly waded into this row on Twitter. But first, let's speak to Ivor Kaplan. He's a former Labour minister and now heads up the Jewish Labour movement. The group is considering taking legal action against Labour. We're having a few problems connecting with Ivor Kaplan, so we'll speak to Billy Bragg first of all. Billy, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. As we heard from Norman Smith there, Labour's come in for a lot of criticism after this new code of conduct. It's not taking in all of the widely accepted International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definitions of anti-Semitism, which you get amongst local government, you get it amongst the CPS, you get it amongst the police. Why is the Labour Party different?
Can I just begin by saying that the abuse that Margaret Hodge suffered, that she mentioned there in your piece, is absolutely abhorrent. And if any of those abusers are found to be members of the Labour Party, they should be expelled from the party. It's simply unacceptable to use that kind of language. I think the IHRA code falls into two distinct parts. Those aspects of anti-Semitism directed at the Jewish people, individuals and Judaism, but there are several of the examples that address directly the behaviour of the State of Israel. Now, the Home Affairs Select Committee looked at the IHRA code last year and found that the one of them, which says to deny the self-determination of the people, to deny the self-determination of the Jewish people is anti-Semitic. That was so wide that it really needed tightening up by adding to it, it is not anti-Semitic to criticise the State of Israel unless anti-Semitic intent can be proved. And I think
Dame Margaret Hodge today has been very clear in saying that the IHRA code allows legitimate criticism of the State of Israel. She said herself, I criticise Israel fairly frequently. We are absolutely able to criticise Israel and still adhere to this code.
Well, the IHRA code, which has only come out in 2016, has already been used by pro-Israeli activists to close down protests against the State of Israel by the Boycott, Disinvestment and Sanctions Group. They specifically put together a petition, which they took to number 10 Downing Street, asking the government to stop the BDS from having its apartheid week. They have a week where they try to show that Palestinian citizens don't get the same rights as Israeli citizens. And this is really important because just last week, the Israeli government passed a law which states that Israel is a Jewish state and has the implications in it to make the 20% of Israeli citizens who speak Arabic into second-class citizens. So,
but that would still be acceptable to criticise that move under this code. I want to ask you as well, irrespective of whether all of this, you believe whether all of this code, this internationally recognised code, should be brought in by the Labour Party, is there not a danger that actually the message you're sending, not only to the Jewish community here in the UK, the wider world, but all of the UK society, is that the Labour Party has not got a handle on this and people are going to believe it's anti-Semitic? For the sake of getting rid of this row, shouldn't they just adhere to this entire code?
Well, I'm afraid between the Labour Party and the Jewish community, there is another party involved in this, and that is the Palestinian people. And whilst I totally recognise the right of Jewish people to decide when they feel that they are being abused, when they feel that they are being attacked, their right to define that is absolute. It is also the right of the Palestinian people to be able to define when they are being attacked. And there are unfortunately aspects, just a few, it's only a few small aspects of the IHRA code which can be used and have already been used to close down debate about the treatment of the Palestinian people by the Israeli government. Now, this is a hard balance to strike. It's not an easy balance to strike, but we can't deal with one historic problem by creating the situation where another one can thrive. This has to be balanced. And it's only these, Labour has extended some of the IHRA definitions to include things like calling Jewish people, capitalists or bankers, or suggesting they're part of international finance. That's not in the IHRA code. It's in the Labour code. But this code needs not only to be balanced, but it needs to be able to stand up in court. Because it's so new, it's never actually been used in court. And this has to be solid so that we have an absolute clear definition of what constitutes anti-Semitism, so we can go after the anti-Semites, get them out of the Labour Party and get them out of the rest of society.
Do you think Dame Margaret Hodge should face disciplinary action within the Labour Party for swearing at Jeremy Corbyn and effectively calling him anti-Semitic?
I'm afraid by doing what she did, Dame Margaret has caused a lot of problems. I wouldn't want to add fuel to the fire by holding her up and making her an example. I think everybody needs to calm down, and we need to find ways to build trust between the Jewish community and the Labour Party. One of the ways to do that might be to take the two additions made by the Home Affairs Select Committee and add them to the code as well. So it's absolutely clear where the line is. We can't have any ambivalence here. We can't allow anti-Semites to get away with attacking Jewish people. The line has to be absolutely clear.
So to be clear, you don't think Dame Margaret Hodge should face any action from the Labour Party?
I don't think it would help.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn's got a handle on this?
I think he's trying to get a handle on it. I mean, he's now accepted that people aren't happy with this. He's put it back forward from the NEC for further consultation. But we have to make sure that we're not...
Consultation, that's the problem, Billy, isn't it? This has been going on a very, very long time, and people are saying, how can it go on so long?
It hasn't been going a long time. The reason it's been going, it hasn't been settled, is because the ambivalence of the wording of some of the examples. And obviously people in the Jewish community feel very, very strongly about this. But as I said, we can't deal with a historic racism towards the Jewish people by creating a space for the continuation of historic discrimination against the Palestinian people. The people in Jewish community have the right to define what anti-Semitism is, but they don't have the right to define what amounts to abuse of the Palestinian people by the Israeli government.
If you're talking about historic racism to Jewish people, can I just pick you up on a tweet that I know that you have since deleted, saying, is it wrong to accuse Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide to the interest of their own nations? That's exactly what is in the code from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, saying accusing Jewish people of being more loyal to Israel than their home country. That's what you tweeted.
Yeah, I did tweet it, and if you have followed up and seen what else I tweeted, you'll see that it was a rhetorical question in a conversation with a person from the Jewish community who has also been tweeting to explain it was a rhetorical question. As soon as I saw it, how it could be misconstrued, I deleted it. And obviously it has been misconstrued by you and your researchers.
Well, no, I've seen the thread on Twitter. I mean, I've read the thread on Twitter when people were pulling you up on it, and you said, oh, what I meant to say was asking whether this should be the case. But you didn't actually, and you were picked up on Twitter by the person who challenged you, saying, yes, but that's not actually what you said, Billy. You made that statement yourself.
No, yes. Do you understand what a rhetorical question is?
I do, Billy.
Okay, well, that's what it was. It was a rhetorical question. I recognised as soon as I had posted it how it could be misconstrued. Unfortunately, it has been misconstrued. And if you go back and look at the thread where I was having the original discussion, rather those people who were picking me up about it, you'll see that this has been a mistake on my part. I accept that, and I apologise to anybody who it's caused concern. But it was a rhetorical question. It wasn't a statement, and I don't defend it.
Billy Bragg, thank you ever so much for speaking to us. Well, I'm pleased to say that we can now speak to Ivor Kaplan, who is the national chairman of the Jewish Labour movement, who are considering legal action against their own party. Thank you for joining us. Just explain to me why you believe that this new code of conduct by the Labour Party doesn't go far enough.
Well, over the weekend, we saw reports about another Facebook group or various Facebook groups and many of the quoted terms in that Facebook group wouldn't fall foul of the new code of conduct. And the simple thing for the Labour Party here is to adopt the IRA definition and all its examples. And if we then want to have some internal discussions about how we build on that, that's a separate issue. The first and most important thing that everyone would expect across the country is for Labour to show it's dealing with anti-Semitism by adopting the IRA code, definition and all its examples.
Labour are saying that anti-Semitism is racism, it's unacceptable in our party and in wider society. And it goes on to say that while the examples are not reproduced word for word from that international code, they are covered in Labour's new code.
Well, let's be clear what happened last Tuesday. We had a sort of unbelievable moment in Labour's long history where 68 rabbis had written to the NEC. The chief rabbi, who never intervenes in domestic politics, had intervened with a letter to the NEC. There was a legal document from Jewish Labour movement about the breaches of the Equality Act by that code of conduct. All of that evidence was ignored in adopting this code of conduct, which I don't think is fit for purpose.
But it's not being ignored, is it? Because Labour is saying that it adopts the IHRA definition verbatim and the vast majority of examples word for word. The other examples are expanded on and contextualised. It's not using the exact wording, but it's absolutely adopting that code.
We have to be clear here. 31 countries, including the United Kingdom, including the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, and other countries across Europe have adopted IRA definition and all its examples. I don't see why it is Labour's job to say we know better either than all those countries or the Jewish community itself, which is clearly united against the code of conduct that Labour has adopted. And we need very quickly to adopt the IRA definition and all its examples, and then we can move on and show to the wider public, which you mentioned earlier, that we are dealing with anti-Semitism. At the moment, this is a row that is not going away.
If the Labour Party doesn't listen to your calls to adopt everything from that internationally recognised code, what happens next?
Well, we have a number of options. Nothing has been ruled in, nothing has been ruled out yet. We have a meeting later today when we'll start to consider those. And of course, once we've got something to say, we'll be very happy to share those with BBC viewers and listeners.
So is that legal action you're potentially going to pursue?
As I just said, nothing's in, nothing's out. All options are yet to be determined.
OK, thank you ever so much for speaking to us. That is Ivor Kaplan, who's the national chairman of the Jewish Labour movement. He says nothing's in, nothing's out, might be considering legal action. We also heard from Billy Bragg, the musician and left-wing campaigner, who also, of course, supports Jeremy Corbyn.
Labour MPs will tonight debate whether the party's new code of conduct goes far enough to tackle anti-Semitism. The new guidelines, which were adopted last week, have been criticised by some Jewish organisations and Labour members. The party says it's reopened a consultation on the code, which is robust and internationally recognised. Well, let's get more now from our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. And Norman, why is this a row that won't go away?
Bluntly, because Mr Corbyn has yet to draw a line under it. Today, all the signs are it could get even worse, with Labour MPs poised to reject their own party's recently drawn up code of conduct on anti-Semitism because they think it isn't tough enough, and instead argue that the party should just accept the widely acknowledged international code, and they're probably going to approve that this evening. At the same time, the veteran Labour MP Margaret Hodge, who herself lost several members of her family in the Holocaust, is threatening to fight disciplinary action being threatened against her for accusing Mr Corbyn of being an anti-Semite and a racist. And this morning, she was not backing away from those claims.
It's by his actions that he has to be judged. And by refusing to adopt the definition in full of what anti-Semitism is, he's put himself in the position that he's perceived by many to be anti-Semitic.
Now, any decision to take disciplinary measures against Margaret Hodge would probably prompt even more uproar, but the signs are amongst those close to Mr Corbyn that the disciplinary action, if any is taken, may be no more than a verbal reprimand.
Thanks, Norman.